Hi everyone, Anchovies here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the two new artifact sets that Hoyoverse has just released for preview for 4.6, so let's go ahead and get into it. So let's start first with Harmonic Whimsy. Now the two-piece gives 18% attack. This is good for any attack scaling unit, and also good for units that heavily prefer two-piece variations. So for example, a character like Shanha, who has a lot of two-piece variation builds with attack percent, and honestly just any DPS character that doesn't mind two-piece variations for early builds. And then for the 4-piece, so when Bond of Life increases or decreases, it'll increase the damage dealt by the character by 18% for 6 seconds. And this can stack up to 3 times, meaning that at most you can get a 54% damage increase. So this is definitely a best in slot set for Arlecchino, mainly just because it relies on increases and decreases to Bond of Life, which is Arlecchino's entire kit. She decreases Bond of Life per normal attack hit. She clears Bond of Life with her Elemental Burst. She can get Bond of Life through holding your charge attack. She has a lot of Bond of Life fluctuation just in her base kit, so she can easily obtain and maintain max stacks with this 4-piece passive effect, which of course makes this again her best in slot set. And even if this set has worse stats than like your best like Glad or whatever other 4-piece that you're using for something like Vape in like Gilded Dreams, even then it'll still outperform it, but it'll just be marginal instead. But regardless, if you're somebody who is looking to main Arlecchino, this is definitely the set that you do want to get if you want to maximize her damage output. Now in terms of other characters, this is where situations start to get a bit more niche, because this really only can be applicable for characters who use weapons like Finale of the Deep or Flowing Purity, so this is limited to sword and callus users that can use those weapons. Now you can actually get max stacks with these weapons for a portion of the character's damage output based on the type of healer that you're using. So if you're using a weaker healer or characters that like to heal over time in small intervals, so you're looking at characters like Bennett when he's not on like a support build and he's more in an offensive build, or a character like Kukishinobu who gives minor healing per tick, you can actually get 3 stacks easily because you get that Bond of Life from the elemental skill cast on the weapon passive, and then usually it would take 2 ticks of healing to then take off the Bond of Life depending on the build that you have on that healer. And thus you could get 3 stacks for at least some portion of your damage uptime. But if you're using a stronger healer or like a burst healer, so say a character like Kokomi or like Charlotte or Baiju, then you're probably going to clear the Bond of Life with like 1 instance of healing, which would only really get you 2 stacks at most, so you wouldn't be able to fully capitalize on it as much compared to weaker healers. And of course, characters that can really use these weapons are usually damage dealing characters, so you're looking at characters like Ayato and Ayaka, for example, for Finale of the Deep, or for Flowing Purity, you're especially looking at characters like Risley or potentially Wanderer if you're more on the fleet play side. So now let's get onto the next set, which is Unfinished Reverie. So this 2-piece also gives 18% attack, which again, good for any attack scaling unit. So we have 2 sets in the same domain that give double attack percent on their 2-piece. Again, good for people who use 2-piece variations. And then for the 4-piece, now the 4-piece is very interesting. So the 4-piece, if the character is out of combat for 3 seconds, then the damage dealt is increased by 50%. So while in combat, when 6 seconds pass when there are no opponents that are affected by burning, the damage is then decreased by 10% for every second afterwards until it reaches 0%. And then when a burning opponent then exists again, then it'll increase by 10% instead until it reaches 50%. And the effect can still trigger when the equipping character is off field. So this is a burning oriented set, and this is realistically only applicable for things like burn melt, or at least that's where I see it being most effective currently. I wouldn't be surprised if they release a future unit that makes it a little bit more justifiable in stuff like specifically burning compositions, but at least in the context of like Spiral Abyss, there's very few opportunities where just pure burning teams really find any level of viability, unless you have certain characters at super high levels of investment. And even then, it's usually just not worth it when you can just run a bunch of other and simpler teams that deal more damage or other Dendro reactions that are just more useful, like Hyper Boom. However, this does have some level of niche applicability, specifically in the context of when you're using a DPS that is used in a burn melt team. So we're looking at stuff like Risley, Ganyu, and even Rosaria. In the context of Risley, this will not outperform Marchese Hunter. Marchese Hunter will still outperform this set. However, the difference is marginal, meaning that there is some level of potential for it to be slightly ahead, but for the most part, it doesn't do as much compared to Marchese Hunter, and in most contexts, if not all of them, March's Hunter will still be the go-to, simply just because of how comfortable it is to use on Risley, and also just the benefit that he gets from both the 2-piece and the 4-piece effect. Now, in the context of a character like Ganyu, for example, this can actually be a best in slot for Burn Melt Ganyu, especially when you compare it to the other 4-piece sets that she uses in these teams, such as like Wanderer's Troop, for example. This set will actually pull ahead by a relatively significant amount. So if you are someone who enjoys Ganyu or even like Rosaria in, Burn Melt team variations, this can be a set that is, although niche, has its applicability and can be best in slot for those units. Now, I'm not too sure in the context of what units you would use for the case of burning. I thought about thinking of cases like putting it on Nahida for the burning effect because of her high elemental mastery count, but no, it just doesn't sound right when I say it out loud. So we're going to leave pure burning context out for now, because these are just teams that either aren't as explored, or, well, they have been explored, but their applicability just isn't far beyond what it could be. So my overall conclusion of these sets, so these are both relatively niche sets. Harmonic Whimsy is mainly a set that you would only really purely farm if you are a person that plays Arlecchino, or if you have a lot of units that you need some 2-piece attack on and you just want a quick farming set real quick that you can later fodder. This can, again, also be another instance where you would farm Harmonic Whimsy or the Unfinished Reverie. And then specifically for Unfinished Reverie, this would really only be a set that you would go for if you are someone who really likes playing things like Burn Melt, and specifically things like Ganyu or Rosaria Burn Melt. But otherwise, again, these are just relatively niche sets, and these will not be go-to sets that you'll just immediately want to farm for. But yeah, that's all I gotta say about these new artifact sets. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any other opinions or thoughts regarding these artifact sets, whether or not you'll be farming for them, and until the next video, bye-bye.